Hello, everybody, and welcome to At the Coalface Live for Friday, this Friday, 11th of March, 2022. It is awesome to be with you here again today, as I am almost every single Friday. And I really love spending this time with you guys. I love sharing my thoughts from the trenches of digital and e-commerce. And I love interacting with you guys, especially on LinkedIn. That's where I've got sort of the biggest audience. Got nearly 24,000 followers on LinkedIn, and it's awesome because I get to interact with so many of you. I try to do my very, very best to interact with your content, and I always appreciate it when you interact with mine, when you give me your thoughts, when you give me your likes, when you give me your comments, when you engage, when you ask questions. I absolutely love that. And as I branch out into other channels and as I continue to build out the podcast, it is awesome to get the feedback from you guys on what you like, maybe what you don't like, what you'd like to see, maybe things that I'm not covering, etc. And that is a beautiful segue into what I want to talk about today, which is online reputation management. And I think a lot of individuals and even a lot of businesses, they get it a little bit twisted when they use the term thought leadership. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with the term thought leadership in a generic sense. I think that thought leadership is actually an important thing that each of us can bring to the table. But a lot of people get put off by that term thought leadership, and they think to themselves, well, I'm not a thought leader. I don't necessarily own a business. I'm not necessarily a senior manager in my role or in my business or in the industry that I work in. I'm maybe new to the industry that I'm working in. I don't necessarily have a ton of experience. So therefore, what do I have to share with the world that would add value to the discussion, that would add value to the world, that wouldn't just be part of the detritus that is out there in the content space? And I think it's easier to conceptualize the thinking around reputation management. And I think we all want to be heard. I think we all want to be understood. I think we all want to be appreciated. I think we all want to make sure that the way that the world perceives us is as close to reality as possible. Now, of course, there's psychopaths out there that want to present one image to the world, and that's not actually who they are, how they are in real life, and they put on a facade. And sometimes that might be entertainers, that might be entrepreneurs, that could be anything really. But I think the vast majority of people out there want to be heard and want to be understood as they are, and they are proud of who they are. They just don't necessarily know how to articulate and share that with the world. And that's what I want to talk about a bit further today. So if we change the conversation, if we alter the conversation from thought leadership and all of the connotations that go along with that, both positive and negative, and we shift the discussion to reputation management, and we say, well, look, I want to have a certain reputation in the industry, whether I'm working for someone or I'm not, whether I have my own business or whether I don't, whether I'm a stay-at-home mom or I'm not. It doesn't really matter where we are and what our station in life is. I think we all want to have a good reputation. I think we should all want to have a good reputation. I think we should all want to have a level of respect in the market. I think we should all strive for a level of respect from our peers because we're respectful, not because we're seeking the validation of others to give our life value and to give our content value, but because we want to be respectful of others. We want to show that respect, and we hopefully can reasonably expect that respect to come back to us in spades. And so I think by focusing on how we can change perceptions around our reputation in the marketplace through content, I think that is a fantastic place to start. And when I tell people and when I share with people the fact that I don't do any outbound marketing at all for my business, for Greenwood Consulting, 100% of my business, since we're still in startup mode. We're only just over a year old, so we're not that old, but 100% of our business, and we're doing very well. We're very successful. We're growing fast, and I'm very grateful for that. But 100% of our business has been based on inbound leads coming directly to me, and 9 times out of 10, that is coming through, LinkedIn direct messages and somebody messaging me and saying, "Hey, I saw this piece of content. I thought it was interesting. Could we have a chat? I think there might be a way you could help us." And so that opens up lots of opportunities to have discussions. My content around the podcast also opens up dialogues and chances for discussions. It opens up opportunities for new partnerships, both with tech partners, agency partners, etc., that can share opportunities with me, and I can share opportunities with them, and we can help each other to grow in the industry. And so I think it's always a little bit shocking when people hear that I don't do any outbound marketing. So I don't do any, I don't do any Google ads. I don't do any Facebook ads. I don't do any paid marketing at all. It's all earned marketing that we do. And so that largely comes as a result of the content flywheel that I've built since early 2018. And when I say content flywheel, basically I just started putting myself out there, and I've told this story a few times before, but for those that haven't heard it or who aren't aware of kind of how I got into this game of creating content around my industry and around what I'm doing and around my thinking, around my input and my hot takes on news, and around how the industry is evolving, particularly as we get into Web3. This is like the third or fourth major transformational wave that has hit our industry since I've been in it in for over 20 years. And so, I just constantly try to share my ideas with the world. And I guess because I'm an extreme extrovert and all the personality tests that I take, I rank well over 95% extroverted in my personality. And so I guess it feels pretty natural to me to have great conversations with people, to share my ideas with the world, to talk in front of a camera, to talk in front of large crowds. I've emceed very large conferences, and it feels like I'm talking to friends. And I literally don't get nervous. It feels as natural as breathing to get up and talk in front of thousands of people. And I absolutely love it. I absolutely enjoy it. It is completely natural to me. And that's partly because of my personality, but it's also partly because of the practice and the focus that I've put on this since early 2018. And I do distinctly remember that leading up to 2018, I had been following Gary Vaynerchuk for a period of, I think at that stage, probably about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And I'd been listening to a lot of what he had been saying, a lot of what other sort of thought leaders, I didn't even know they were called thought leaders. I didn't even know that really understand the term thought leader at the time. But in hindsight, I was following some thought leaders in the industry, basically people that I enjoyed their content. I enjoyed the fact that they had divergent thinking. I appreciated the fact that they were willing to put themselves out there, that they were willing to make content that was enjoyable for me to watch, to listen to consume, that they had created a community around themselves of mostly like-minded people to where we could engage and discuss with each other in their comment threads, whether that be on Instagram, whether that be on LinkedIn, wherever it might be that they were putting out content. There was a self-coalescing audience that congregated around those thought leaders' content because we had an appreciation and a respect for that content. And for some reason or another, it may have resonated with us. And so I was always fascinated by that. I was fascinated by the fact that some thought leaders slash influencers, and I absolutely hate that term influencer. I think it's been bastardized to death. But there are influence is a thing, right? And it's always been a thing. As long as there's been humanity and people living in tribes, there's been influence. The concept of influence and the concept of being able to have discussions with people where you have an influence over their thinking or their decision making and banter and rhetoric. And so I think what always fascinated me is how somebody like a Gary Vaynerchuk could amass an audience of tens of millions of people, how on virtually every single platform he was on, he would have 3, 4, 5, 10 million people following him, hanging on his every word, going to his conferences, buying tickets, wanting to engage with his business. Obviously, at this point, he when I first started listening to Gary, he didn't have VaynerMedia. He didn't, it wasn't long. He hadn't been out of the family business for that long. And so he was really just talking about business, and he was out there talking about growing his business. He may have had he may have had VaynerMedia at that time, but it was still in its nascent, very early years when he was in the Buddy Media offices, and it was just still a glimmer in his eye. And so it was very interesting to me to grasp the fact that someone just talking about their passion, just talking about their knowledge, just talking about what they loved in life and talking about their experiences how that could, by definition, be a magnet for people that cared about the same things and could build a large audience into the millions of people. And so we had, even at that time, there was already fashion influencers and people putting out content around makeup and clothing hauls, and just basically, if you had a passion around it, you could easily put out content around it. And especially in 2018, early 2018, and even earlier, going back to 2013, 2014, 2015, there wasn't as much noise online, and there wasn't as many people putting out their thoughts into the world. And as a result of that, you were an outlier. If you were putting out your thoughts into the world and you were being candid with the world and you were willing to get in front of a camera and tell people what you thought, you were an outlier. Sure, the group of outliers was growing, but as a percentage of the overall whole of society, still a tiny fraction of a percentage of people were putting out their thoughts into the world on a regular basis in a structured way. So when I say structured and consistent, I mean literally having a weekly cadence or a daily cadence or a monthly cadence of putting out content across specific channels in a consistent way, so that the audience had confidence in the content that was going to be put out regularly. And therefore, there was some credibility. There was some credibility that was built up around that. And they say that familiarity breeds contempt. But in the online space, I've actually found the exact opposite. I've found that familiarity breeds influence, and familiarity can build context around what you're putting out there and what you're saying. Because, in a 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute piece of content, it's hard to grasp what a person is all about. We're complex as human beings. We have lots of interests, both professional and leisure and entertainment, and we're complex beings. We have stacked interests that there's a complex interplay between our professional and our personal interests, and how our personal interests and our personal study and our personal research can influence our professional life, and vice versa. And so as a result of that, I think that by being consistent and by putting out that content on a more regular basis, people can get a more holistic view of who we are and what we're all about, as opposed to that 30-second snippet that they saw, on a conference that we did 3 months before, 6 months before. I think it becomes really difficult to manage and maintain your reputation when you're not putting out content, because it's left up to interpretation. And it's even easier to be left up to interpretation if you're hardly ever putting out content. If you put out 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of content per year, then the gap between perception and reality is significantly greater. Whereas because I'm putting out content virtually every single day, people know my thinking on a daily basis, and they also see how my thinking evolves. They see how my knowledge evolves. They see how my experience evolves over time. When I first started this business, my business, just over a year ago, obviously I had a certain view on the world, I had a certain take on the world based on other businesses that I had owned previously, and agency life, and other clients that I'd worked with, and brands that I had worked with before, and other experiences that I'd had. But obviously that whole experience set continues to evolve over time as I continue to work with my clients and my business on a direct basis, on a day-to-day basis. Then my understanding of the world continues to change. My understanding of the pain points in the industry continues to change. My understanding of how to help, people that are working in the industry changes. And I get messages, direct messages, primarily on LinkedIn, and I get messages probably at least once a week of people saying, "Hey, Jace, really enjoying your content, really love what you're putting out there. How can I do something similar? How can I, become kind of well known? How can I become known for my knowledge? How can I become known for my experience? How can I start to get to a place where I'm better recognized in the market around what I do and what I think? And how can I have a greater impact? How can I have a bigger impact on the world?" And there is no in my experience, there is no secret sauce to this. There is no silver bullet to this. There is no easy way to become well known overnight. It is a hard slog. I have been putting out content virtually every single day since early 2018. Now I have a certain amount of name recognition out there now, but we're in March 2022. So, this has not happened overnight by any means. We're talking over 4 years of putting out content on a very, very regular cadence, being willing to put my thoughts out there and be critiqued and be criticized, and be called out where people disagree with me, being willing to do that and being vulnerable for almost 4 years or over 4 years now, that is where that hard slog starts to come to fruition. And that's where you start to build up with every single new follower, with every single, even people that don't necessarily agree with you, even for people that disagree with you, even for people that don't align with your way of thinking, even with people that don't align with what you're putting out in the world and it doesn't resonate with them. You are still going to be well known to them because your content is very frequently probably going to turn up in their feed. It's probably very frequently going to turn up in their space, particularly if they work in a similar industry, in a similar vertical to you. You are going to be, if you are consistent with what you're putting out there, then your content is going to be in their face on a very, very routine basis, whether they like it or not. And as a result of that, it creates an opportunity for you to feed off of each other. It gives you an opportunity to challenge each other. It gives you an opportunity to question each other. And look, I learn just as much, if not more, from the people who challenge my thinking and question my thinking and have their, have divergent thought to me. I don't ever want to be considered kind of the smartest person in the room or the smartest person in a discussion. I just want to partake in the discussion. I want to hopefully contribute to the discussion, because we all have a lens that we see the world through. We all have a lens that we see our professional and our personal life through, based on nature and nurture, based on the way that we were raised, based on the environment that we were raised in, and based on the experiences that we've had. And we all have that unique stack that creates who we are as an individual. And so therefore the lens that we see the world through is always going to be different to everybody else. And we're never going to have perfect alignment with everybody. Even in our own vertical, we're never going to have perfect alignment with those people. And so I think that being willing to be challenged, being willing to be embarrassed, being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to put your thoughts out there, not knowing where they're going to land and not knowing how they're going to be received and not knowing the kind of feedback that you're going to get. I think that is the secret to online reputation management, because at the end of the day, if you're not putting your thoughts out there, you don't have a chance in hell of being a thought leader, because by definition, in order to be a thought leader, you have to put your thoughts out there into the world, and you have to open them up to feedback and to critique. And so I guess what I wanted to say around that is that this opportunity is open to anyone. And sure, particularly social media, which is where most of us are putting out content these days. Obviously, I've got my own podcast and I've got other channels that I put out content through. But, my primary content channels are, LinkedIn and other social media channels. And that's where most people are putting out their thoughts. They're putting it out into social media. They're trying to create an audience around them, or a tribe around them of like-minded people that they can share their thoughts with, that they can resonate with, and they can have a conversation with. And when we think about that, obviously consistency matters in those environments, because not every single piece, even in your followers, even out of your followers, when we look at the major social media platforms, they always go through a standard evolution. They go through virtually unlimited organic reach. And we have a situation where when a social media platform reaches a specific escape velocity, meaning they reach maturation, then all of a sudden they tend to clamp down, and it's always becomes a pay to play social media environment. And we saw that with Facebook. We saw that with Instagram. We're seeing that right today. We're seeing that right now with LinkedIn. We're seeing the organic reach drop. We're seeing the competition on the platform and the noise on the platform increase. We're seeing that on TikTok. And I would estimate, as a guess, I would say that we have 12 to 18 more months before TikTok starts to become largely a pay-to-play platform. So we have 12 to 18 months on TikTok, where organic reach is incredible. It's massive. It's ridiculous. It's free. Almost anyone can build a brand on TikTok almost overnight, very, very rapidly, particularly if they're willing to put themselves and their thoughts out into the world. Thank you very much, Roseanne. Appreciate you joining me today, and thank you very much for your kind words. I really appreciate that. Love what you're doing as well. You put your thoughts out in the world on a very regular basis as well. So I love the vulnerability that you show also. But if we think about the natural evolution, the natural bell curve that every social media platform goes through, they always go through that wide open, It's like the Wild West on these platforms, right? It's a free for all. It's 100% organic reach. You basically, if you have a connection or you have a follower, they're going to see just about every single piece of content you put out. Then as the platform reaches a state of maturation, when it reaches escape velocity, on that bell curve, then all of a sudden the noise on the platform, meaning the sum total of the content being put out on that platform, gets to such a point where the algorithm has to start curating what everyone sees. Because if you saw everything that from every single person that you followed, you'd never be able to get through it all on your feed, because the amount of content being put out is it's such a high volume. And so what happens is the algorithm starts to self-select for you based on the content that you're routinely engaging with. And there's nothing nefarious about that. It is about managing what you see in your feed and tailoring that to other pieces of content that you've already showed interest in. And that's the signals that you're giving to the social platforms to tell them how to cater your feed in this age of unlimited content, when there's millions of pieces of content being posted to a social media platform on a daily basis. There has to be some level of automatic curation there, to where you're not going to see everything from every single person that you're following. It's just impossible. And so they're trying to surprise and delight you by chucking in some content from people that you don't follow and that you're not connected with in any way, plus combined with the curation that automatically has to happen from all the content that your connections and your followers and the people that you follow, that you're associated with, they're trying to curate that in your feed. And then they're also trying to make money. And so when they reach critical mass as a platform, then all of a sudden they have to not only figure out how to curate the feed of content that you're seeing, because there's just so much of it, there's a flood of it, but then they also have to figure out, how can we make ourselves sustainable as a business and profitable as a business, and growing commercially and financially as a business, which then moves us towards that marketing revenue based model. And so every single social platform since the beginning of social media has gone through this evolution. The ones that have survived have anyway. And I believe we're going to see that exact same thing with TikTok and all of the new social media platforms that will surely follow it. And I think what people need to understand is that whilst you may not have a massive audience today, that is actually a good thing, because what it means is, as you continue to put your thoughts out into the world, as you continue to share your ideas, your concepts, your learnings, your experience with the world, as you continue to share that freely, that is giving you an element of practice before you're on the big stage. So when I had 30 followers, when I had 50 followers, when I had 100 followers on LinkedIn, and only, a third of those were maybe seeing my content on a regular basis. So perhaps, 30 followers were seeing my content on a regular basis on LinkedIn. I was learning, I was formulating ways to share my ideas with the world that would hopefully resonate with an audience without having the added pressure of having 20, 22, 23, 24,000 followers potentially being exposed to my content. I was able to learn in a very low risk, low pressure way when I had no one following me, and as I continued to, steadily put out content, and as the following grew, then obviously that puts a little more pressure on you to make sure that you're continually leveling up your game, to make sure that you are putting out content that is going to resonate with that audience that has chosen to associate themselves with you. And so I think that everyone needs to take the opportunity when they're new to a platform. When I look at TikTok, I think I don't know, I've got like 50 followers on TikTok, or maybe 70 followers on TikTok, or something ridiculous. I don't even have 100 followers on TikTok. And that's fine. I will continue to put out content on TikTok to figure out what works. I will continue to put out content and take the risk. I could stay safe in my little LinkedIn bubble where I have a pretty good following and a pretty good, amount of respect and reputation. I could stay in that nice little bubble, but nothing grows in those bubbles. And so, I'm putting myself out there on platforms where I have almost no followers. On Instagram, I've got well under 1,000 followers. And so on some of these other platforms, even when I look at YouTube, and I've got, I think, around 600 followers or something stupid like that on YouTube, I'm continuing to put out YouTube shorts. I'm continuing to push up the clips of my podcast to YouTube, and sure, I don't have anywhere near the following that I do on LinkedIn, but that's okay. I'm okay with that, because you know what I'm doing? I'm learning in an environment that has virtually zero pressure and zero risk associated with it. If I had 100,000 followers, or if I had 1 million followers on TikTok, I would feel a tremendous amount of pressure to make sure that every single piece of content that I put out was entertaining, that it was funny, that it was enjoyable, that it had a chance of going viral. Whereas on TikTok today, I can put out content that is mostly just for me. That, hey, this is a learning experience. This is a challenge for myself to figure out how to articulate my thinking in 60 seconds or less, and trying to put it in a succinct way that grabs people's attention, and then I can repurpose that content across other channels. So for me, it's mostly about a learning exercise. But for anybody that is new to LinkedIn, or new to any platform, new to any channel, or they're just starting their podcast for the very first time, I've got a decent following on my podcast now, but man, is it a slow burn. All podcasts, from pretty much every single podcast host I've ever spoken to, particularly that's started a podcast in the last 5 years, they will tell you that unless they've had a stroke of good luck and they've been featured by some online publication that says this is the podcast to listen to, and they've had some element of virality, apart from that, it is just a hard slog. You continue to put your thoughts in the world, you continue to put your content in the world, and eventually your tribe will find you. I love that saying, that your vibe attracts your tribe, and I've found that to certainly be true. I continue to put out content that I'm proud of. I continue to put content out that I enjoy creating. I continue talking about topics that I enjoy talking about based on my experience. I try very hard to stay in my lane whilst constantly challenging and pushing myself at the same time. And I think if you make that your focus, I think if you make your creation of content a learning experience, if you focus on what am I going to learn today by creating this piece of content, what am I going to learn by using this new piece of hardware, or using a new microphone, or using a new 3-axis gimbal, or using a new setting on my iPhone, or using a new mixing deck for my podcast, or whatever it is that you're using to try to up the production quality of your content. Because I think we should all focus on that. I think we should all be trying to not only focus on producing the best quality content itself possible, but we should associate the highest production value we can muster in the process. And that means constantly learning about new production techniques and new distribution channels to put that out there in the world. But I think if we all collectively focus on what are we going to learn from this, and is it a learning opportunity for us, instead of focusing on, hey, does this piece of content go viral, I think we'll all feel a lot less pressure when we put out that content in the world, when we put out our thoughts into the world, and take on board that feedback. Hey, look, if a piece of content you put out gets 0 comments and it gets 0 likes, well, that's just as important a piece of feedback to you in your content creation process as getting 50 likes and getting 100 comments, because it provides, you think of it like bowling, right? When kids are bowling, they have these bumpers that drop down into the gutters, right? And they push the bowling ball off of this ramp, and it goes down the alleyway, and it's got these bumpers on each side, and it gives them a greater chance of hitting some pins at the end of the bowling alley. If we think of the feedback that we get through our content, whether that be a lack of feedback, negative feedback, or positive feedback, if we think of that as bumpers for our content that keep us in our lane, then we will not take that so personally. If we say, well, hey, look, that piece of content got virtually 0 feedback. Obviously, that didn't connect with anyone. Obviously, no one wanted to read that. Obviously, no one wanted to see that. Obviously, no one wanted to listen to that. Then that will tell you, that will guide you, that will give you a course correction pathway for the next pieces of content that you create. And conversely, if you create a piece of content and it massively resonates and people love it and they comment and they like and they engage with you on that piece of content, well, that's also a guide for your lane of content, and saying, hey, I need to produce more content around these topics and these subjects, because this is clearly something that is connecting with other people and is actually having an impact in their lives and in something that they're interested in just naturally. And it might be down to your production quality. It might be down to the way that you're saying things, but more often than not, it's down to the actual topical nature of what you're saying and how you're delivering it. So I think if we can all get outside of our ego, because when you first start creating content, your ego will influence not only what you say but how you say it. It will influence whether you're nervous or not. And people can sense that. They can sense whether it feels natural for you to talk in front of a camera or a microphone, or when you're writing long form content or short form content. That sense of yourself, that sense of trueness to yourself, that sense of confidence or lack thereof will absolutely shine through in your content. People aren't dumb. They can pick up on that. They can pick up just as much as they can in person. They can pick up on your social signals and your social cues. They can pick up on that through your content as well. And so that gets back to that whole concept of needing to practice. We all, in order to get good at something, we have to practice. And so if we want to get good at producing content, if we want to get good at talking in front of people without umming and ahhing and not being able to articulate our thoughts clearly, if we want to get past that and we want to get better at articulating our thoughts, if we want to get better at sharing our thoughts with the world and hopefully having a positive impact on the world, then that takes practice. And that's true of any of us, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, or an ambivert, doesn't really matter. Now, yes, speaking in front of people comes very naturally to me. So I didn't necessarily have to work on the fear factor of that, but definitely you have to pretty much push your ego to the door. Otherwise, you would never, ever start to create content in the first place. Because if I'd let my ego get in the way and say, well, look, I'm just starting out and I've got 30 followers. So God, I'm never going to be a Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm never going to be a Chris Walker. I'm never going to be, I'm never going to be a Rick Watson. I'm never going to be some of these other people in our industry that are very influential and are putting out great content on a regular basis. I'm never going to be those people. So why would I even try? But that's exactly the key. You shouldn't try to be those other people. You should try to be yourself, but you have to actually know what that means. You have to know yourself well enough to know what being yourself actually means, knowing to you what being authentic means and sharing that with the world. So I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today. It's a little bit off kilter, I guess, or away from the types of topics that I would typically talk about particularly on my Friday show, where I typically talk about something directly related to digital e-commerce. But I know that there's a lot of people out there that have asked me for advice. Hey, how do I grow my audience? How do I, what? And oftentimes it actually comes across as, what equipment do I use to do this? What equipment do I use for my podcast? What equipment do I use for, putting out videos? What equipment do I use? What software do I use? And et cetera. And my number one piece of advice is just start. And I know a lot of people say this, but literally you will figure it out as you go along. And particularly when you start out, because you will have either a non-existent or a very, very tiny audience, that is the time you can learn. That is the time you can play with different microphones, or just use the microphone in your laptop, or just use your iPhone, or just, production quality matters less at that point than just putting out the content on a regular basis and exercising that muscle of creating the content on a regular basis, and exercising that cadence of putting your thoughts out there in the world and being open to critique. Creating that habit is much, much more important, particularly in the beginning, than the quality of the content that you're putting out. So my advice to you is, if you want to manage your reputation, if it's important to you to be heard in the world, if you think you have some ideas that can help and benefit the world and make the world a better place, then by all means, start today, put your thoughts out into the world. And ultimately, when I first started creating content in 2018, I didn't know that I was going to start a business in, 2021. I didn't know that I was going to start a consulting company. I didn't know, that the audience that was around my content was, how that was going to matter to me in my future. I didn't know how my content was going to allow me to connect with so many cool, amazing people in the industry, swap ideas, swap stories, give me opportunities to talk at conferences, give me the opportunity to form partnerships with tech companies and other vendors. I had no idea where that I guess that opportunity of taking, having faith that if I put good things out into the world, I did my best. If my intent was good to put out good content into the world and to put good feelings out and good thoughts out into the world, I just had to have faith that the process would turn out good, that the process of learning, the process of exercising that content muscle, that would ultimately end up in some good things. And if not, then I was always going to learn something out of the process anyway. So I was always going to get something out of the process. But here we are, nearly over 4 years later, and I have a business where I do not have to do outbound marketing. I have a business where my clients find me. They come to me and they say, hey, Jason, I've been following you for a while now. Your content, it seems to make a lot of sense. And hey, can we find a way to work together? And it is that is super fulfilling, because I never had that intent when I started putting content out in the world. I had no idea where this was going to lead, but it's led to a very, very good place. And it's led to a place of freedom and opportunity in my life that I could have never envisaged, that I could have never imagined. So have faith in the process. And if you want to manage your reputation, then get out there, put yourself on the line, treat it as a learning experience. Don't get too wrapped up in ego. Don't get too wrapped up in how many followers you have. And I tell you, if the intent is pure, the intent is good, and you continue to stay in your lane and you continue to put good things out in the world, good things tend to return. And that tends to be just how it plays out. So, um, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much, Roseanne. I use an iPhone for almost everything that I do as well. And everything that goes on TikTok, it's all iPhone. It's all while I'm walking around our property basically here, and I just record my thoughts and I chuck it out there. So, anyways, thanks guys for joining me today. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I'll look forward to being with you next Friday. Thank you for joining me, and we'll catch up again soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Roseanne. Have a fabulous weekend. Bye bye.